So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar that we're hosting with Blue State, that's looking at diversifying income and scaling with digital. And this is, as I said, a partnership that Bond has with Blue State. My name is Zoe Abrahamson. I'm a senior funding advisor at Bond. I just wanted to kind of start at the beginning to welcome Blue State and explain who's going to be running the session for you. So it's going to be Lizzie Zipser, who's going to be facilitating the session. She works at Blue State and she's Director of Global Strategy and Insight. We're also welcoming 3 other panelists who are going to be talking through how they've worked with Blue State. So we've got Emma Bergflow from Plan International, who's the head of digital fundraising. We've got Erwin Fernandez from UNICEF, who is the global chief of individual giving. And we've got Sage Jennings, who is a digital fundraising manager in the UK for UNHCR. Just to let you all know that this session is going to be recorded. I'm going to be handing over to Lizzie for the remainder of the session, and I'll come back to you right at the end. All right, thank you. Over to you, Lizzie.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Zoe. And thank you, Bond, for having us. We hope the next 50 minutes or so would be helpful for everyone listening. We also know that some organizations are expecting some news about statutory funding and potential cuts. So this is particularly timely for how organizations can supplement and rebalance their funding to see how to better engage the public, especially through innovation and digital. And we're really excited to have our panelists here today to talk about how some of the organizations leading the way have been doing it through the pandemic and beyond. Really just reflecting on the year that we've had. We've just published a report where in the introduction it says this year was a unprecedented year, and there's no question that it's no surprise that the word unprecedented has been used an unprecedented amount of time in the year. Nothing has worked to plan, and nothing was predictable in the year. And so we're really excited to work with a range of clients, but also really help to understand what trends, what shifts to digital, to different audiences, to different funding propositions, and how organizations are adapting to constant change, building new models, doing things in a new way. We're going to take the poll offline, but it's really interesting to see that our winner in the poll has been 65% of our audience that have taken the poll, and we'd love for everybody else to also jump on slido.com and use the code. It's the same code that's going to be used for our Q&A as well, so worth logging in either on your phone or on your browser. But really interesting to see the picture of most people saying they needed to create new public fundraising products and propositions, more of the funding portfolio going to digital, and investment in new audiences, which is really mirroring the trend that we're seeing with a lot of our clients. So I'd love to start by going to Owen, who's Chief of Individual Giving at UNICEF. Tell us about the shifts you've had to make since the pandemic. UNICEF is now positioning its individual giving strategy as a digital-first strategy. That's a huge shift from the former, much more face-to-face fundraising, right? Can you tell us a bit about your journey, your experience of changing direction so dramatically?
Yeah, no, thanks, Lizzie, and a very good afternoon, good morning to all of you. First off, I think the word unprecedented will be used on this call as well a number of times. It has been 2020 was a really difficult year, but the one thing that really stands out in some ways is really the generosity of people out there, and I think that's been quite amazing. The level of support, the kind of solidarity we're seeing is been unprecedented, and what that has meant is a number of organizations, including UNICEF, have had, I would say, quite record-breaking fundraising results. Globally, we've added about 1.2 million donors digitally. This is not the overall donor base. This is just digitally. We've added 1.2 million donors in 2020, which basically means that UNICEF is signing up a new donor now every 29 seconds. I mean, this is these are big numbers, and these are all digital donors. Now, while this is not entirely new, it must be said that COVID and 2020 have sort of pushed this in a way that hasn't happened before. The shift has been quite dramatic. But even as I say that, I want to be quite clear that face-to-face isn't dead yet. we had about 300,000 plus regular donors coming in from face-to-face. So for me, it is a deliberate choice to say that we want to move to a digital-first strategy. It's not on account of face-to-face, but it's more on account of a few things, starting with for the audiences, talking of new audiences, but also the whole world is moving in some way. And as more people are moving online, people are getting more comfortable with transacting online. E-commerce is booming like never before. People are more familiar with the use of wallets. The use of fintech is becoming more rampant, and you're seeing very much organizations such as us finding it easier to transact. And this is not just with younger folk, but we're seeing the numbers even with older age groups. For instance, if you look at a market like Thailand in 2020, people in the age group 56 to 74, which worked really well for us because that's where a lot of people have the money, they spend more than 8 hours online. So that's quite significant. And these are people who are also transacting online. So that would be one big shift that's happening and pushing us in this direction. The ability to tell stories, very impactful stories, again, using data, using insights, that's another direction. We're able to create new products, new propositions, and test those more easily. So that's the other part that's making this work really well for us. And the other thing is digital works really well as an omni-channel foundation, I would say. Like, for example, if you're doing DRTV or telethons or online events, you can only succeed if you've got a good digital platform and you've got the digital tools in place to really leverage those. So all of that combining together has really worked well for us to be able to get new donors. But I don't want to make this about new donors only. We've always been working on retention, working on building strong relationships with donors, better segmentation, better experience for donors using digital tools. So that's been actually slightly started much earlier. Those investments have been happening, and now it's becoming even more important for us to build, say, personalized personalized journeys, which we're doing at scale. But thanks to marketing automation, thanks to better data, better analytics, all of those are now coming together and driving the shift that you spoke of at UNICEF.
Fantastic. And you work globally, and we know that some markets and some teams would be more ready for the shift and more adept at digital skills and technology, and some markets have not had that investment or that capacity in their teams. How are you finding that working with different offices, different markets with different capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, some of our biggest growth is coming in from a market like China. And in China, we do not have any other sort of fundraising. We don't do face-to-face, we don't do DM. We're only doing digital. So obviously, if you're starting out, as a new entity, it's so much simpler to just jump in and start off with digital right away. However, other markets as well are, sort of picking up and running with digital. In some way, there is a bit of a challenge because we're now talking of moving models almost. So the analog model that was very much in use is quite sort of dated now. The use of data, the use of analytics, I think those are some of the most challenging areas, where we're finding it difficult to make that shift happen. If I were to look at saying what's the biggest investment that we could make, it would be in the area of culture change. It would be in the area of building capacities and building skills. Those would be the big areas that we find more challenging to tackle. Investments in technology and investments in platforms, etc. I think while they're important, they're much easier to manage. But getting the shift in culture, the ability to use data well, the marketing skills, and a deep vertical knowledge of digital, I think all of those areas seem to be much harder. And that's where the role of UNICEF and the headquarters sort of comes in, because we're able to actually then take best practice from markets like China, who are doing it well, the UK, who are doing it well, and make that available across the world, build training programs so that we can actually then, sort of foster some of this change more globally. And also very often it helps that, we've got investment funds that we can encourage markets to do this well. So some of the products, for example, the UK has developed for digital. We're taking those now and we're scaling those across, all parts of UNICEF. So a lot of testing can happen in one part of the world and gets very easily replicated across other parts of UNICEF. So those are some of the things that we're deploying to be able to actually scale much more quickly. I don't think there's necessarily a big barrier because people have seen the numbers and they can see that results are coming through. It's about now building that knowledge, building that capacity, and helping markets to then take the advantage of those numbers I spoke of. that they can actually deliver, for digital.
Yeah, it's great, and it's great to see that cultural shift as well. So historically, a lot of our clients may have had some more challenges of convincing people who are very much persuaded by the old models to say, why would we change model? Why would we mess with something that isn't broken? It's really great to see that culture shift. Results are driving that culture shift. It's not as much of a persuasion challenge as much as it used to be in the past, I think. I'd love to get your input for organizations that are starting this journey or maybe haven't started this journey. Maybe their organization is a bit more looking forward to everything returning to normal after the pandemic. What advice would you have for someone that wants to make this shift and hasn't quite been able to convince the organization that it's needed?
I'd certainly say that most organizations would have a presence online, whether it's on social media, whether it's on, I would certainly think that, getting the help of, so we certainly, this is like working with Blue State was a big bonus for us, because we got some of the really smart ideas coming through. We got a lot of data, we got a lot of, background material to be able to make the case quite well with internal stakeholders. I think that would be a good starting point, is how do you sort of, understand what's holding you back? Is it the information that you need? Because the numbers out there now in terms of audiences will very much show that people are going online, people are donating online. But understanding what's the barrier within the organization would be a good starting point. I would certainly feel that's the way to sort of tackle this. But clearly, even most organizations that I speak to, they've seen some, not some, they've seen a good growth in digital already in 2020. So there is certainly a beginning, which you can't deny. There's no, and I think it's important to say that there's no going back on that, because that's what you're seeing from audiences. You're seeing your own results, and you're seeing the challenge around some of the social distancing brings to face and those areas of our work. It's certainly, we've also seen the quality of donor, the profitability of some of our operations from digital. All of those markers will be available within even small organizations for them to be able to make the business case for growth and investment in digital.
Great. I'd love to throw to our panelists now. Emma, the point on building capacity in different markets and really helping people make this cultural shift and conceptual shift to digital, how does that reflect the journey plan's been on?
Well, first of all, I really agree with Irvin. We can see the same trends going on. I don't think we're going to go back. The sort of major shift in donor behavior that we saw last year, really spiraling. I think many people have really learned to be online, to buy things online, and also to really read news and so on. So the trend that we can also see within our target audiences is that it's not necessarily young people that actually are online anymore. It's really all our target audiences. So that's a huge shift. And I think that's also a great opportunity for our sector as well, to be able to digitalize our communication. So changes that usually takes maybe 5 years have passed by in just a few months. So that's actually quite great. So at least one good thing came out of this. At Plan, we were working with expanding digital fundraising capacity, but during 2020, we really realized that we needed to move faster. And the main reason for that was actually that we saw that when most of our face-to-face team couldn't operate any longer, we really realized that we needed to diversify our channel portfolio for fundraising. So we really started to advance the digital even more. And we had both markets that have been working with digital fundraising for years. They have quite big teams and working data-driven already. But we also had a lot of markets that were really in the beginning of their journey. So what we've done globally is actually to conduct a real training program in different levels, depending on where you are, and really try to sort of leverage the knowledge and skills that we already have and be able to scale that. So during last year, we really focused on building global networks and the different groups that could really train other groups. We built a body up program, for instance, where we matched an office that have really been working within digital for a while and are really specialized to sort of match them up in some kind of mentorship program with another, local office. So we really try to spearhead as much as we can and sort of advance digital during this year. And this is also, I think it's because actually due to the pandemic that we did our first digital first fundraising campaign. So we really learned to work together, many offices or many markets in one go to be able to grow.
Fantastic, and this leads really nicely into our next section here. And just a quick shout out, there's another link to the Q&A. Please add questions. So we're monitoring them. If they're directly relevant, we can add questions while we're talking in the different sections. You can also vote and upvote the ones you really want answers to for the end of the presentation at the end of the Q&A section. So please do click on the link and go and add your questions there. I'd love to go to Sage next. So most iNGOs have very strict budgeting guidelines, yearly plans, including channel allocation, strict reforecasting, ROI expectations that we have to use funding very responsibly, and that leads to a certain level of bureaucracy. At the same time, a lot of NGOs and organizations working in international development rely very heavily on emergencies. Being able to be really agile and respond in a rapid moment, it doesn't always work with the pace of UN bodies and large-scale organizations. I really want to throw now to Sage, who's Digital Fundraising Manager at UK for UNHCR, UN Refugee Agency. We've been shifting the way digital fundraising is planned, managed in a much more agile process, much more digital-first process. Sage, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you do digital fundraising now, and how's your emergency fundraising changed since the pandemic?
Yeah, of course. So I guess like everyone else here, I've used the word unprecedented and unprecedented amount of times over the past year. Our fundraising, our digital fundraising specifically, has changed a lot in the past year. Kind of like most organizations, our digital budget was planned and allocated across the year for specific appeals and activities. This included the potential to respond to 1.5 emergencies in 2020, which is our average. But as we all know, 2020 was anything but average, and we had many more than 1.5 emergencies. So just to give a bit of context beforehand, going into 2020, one of our main priorities was emergency preparedness. This meant improving and finalizing a new emergency protocol to ensure we'd be able to launch an emergency appeal as quickly as humanly possible. We had issues with approvals internally, and then also issues with approvals on Facebook. So we wanted to be prepared and make sure we could launch. So with this being said, I think we're in the final steps of finalizing our protocol when the Idlib emergency happened in February 2020. And luckily we had done enough preparation to ensure we could launch within 6 hours and start fundraising ASAP. At the time, this was our most successful digital fundraising campaign in recent years, and what we assumed would be our biggest emergency of 2020. That was before March 11th, and our Idlib appeal came to a screeching halt, and we quickly launched our second emergency of 2020. As I mentioned, we had originally budgeted and planned for 1.5 emergencies in 2020, but that was obviously before the pandemic. So we quickly used our entire emergency budget, but looking at the performance of the appeal, we made the decision to reallocate budget reserved for seasonal appeals to continue to run our COVID emergency appeal. It doesn't feel really radical, kind of moving budget, but just by being able to look at the numbers and performance of our COVID appeal, we were able to see that we would raise much more by continuing that appeal than what we had already planned for our winter appeal and for some of our other seasonal appeals throughout the year. So kind of with the support of our leadership teams were able to kind of make that shift quickly and continue fundraising for COVID. And essentially, this kind of agility, both within approvals and then within budget flexibility, enabled us to raise more in 2020 online than we did in 2017, 2018, and 2019 combined. So simply put, I guess one of the biggest takeaways from last year and one of the simplest changes is just working on that agility. And then I guess, you know, kind of saying that if you have the budget, just spend the money, and if something's working. And then also just kind of being open to changing plans when necessary.
Fantastic. And in a year where a lot of organizations are reporting their income dipping, it's a real testimony that it can be done, actually raising a phenomenal amount of money just by working differently and not launching appeals when it's planned to launch an appeal, but actually listening to the audience and responding to what people are talking about and what really resonated with people, and just kind of leaning into that as opposed to the planned themes and topics that were in the previous plan. It's one of those, throw the plan out the window and just react to what's happening in the world. And we know the team also uses sort of social listening to figure out when is a fundraisable moment, as we say. Do you want to tell everyone more about that approach and how that helps to figure out if people are aware of an emergency?
Yeah, of course. No, social listening is incredible. I think it's really kind of transformed how we fundraise online and how we respond to digital fundraising moments. I think, like most organizations, we would replicate what we were doing offline online. So we would have an offline appeal, and then we would just duplicate that online, and we would kind of have the same creative, have the same like feel and then voice and then tone, and we realized that just wasn't working, and we kind of struggled to be like, well, I don't know why this isn't working. So kind of looking at social listening, we were able to actually match kind of the appeals to what people were actually talking about, and not necessarily what we were talking about internally, but what the public is responding to. And I think that really helped us to be able to launch quickly and then to actually react to what the public is talking to that's relevant to our work.
Yeah, it's as someone who works very closely with the team that does this work, it really changes the language that we use and how we frame a particular issue and how closely we can talk about something in the language that people actually understand it. Is a big shift in the digital fundraising context. And I'd love to also sort of follow that up. There was a lot of investigation and changes of how we measure performance as well. So looking at moving from a more traditional model of based on last click, so knowing exactly which channel drove exactly how many donations, which is a very offline way of measuring things, to actually evolving that. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So attributions kind of is still an ongoing battle, and it's still far from perfect. But I think in the model that we used was always just last click, as you said, Lizzie. And we've kind of was very rigid in the sense that this activity led to this donation. And if one activity like display didn't show a high ROI or kind of show the same results as maybe social or direct marketing, there was kind of that inclination to pause it and stop it because it's just not working. But I think kind of really being able to look at that halo of all the different activities, and then really being able to kind of see how that works. We tested that last year where we actually ran display ads and retargeting to some of our existing donors, and we saw that there was actual legitimate evidence that it did support other activities. And then even though they weren't donating through social or through display directly, or even from the emails, they were donating organically. And then so there was evidence that actually the other activities and kind of that halo really does work.
Yeah, lots of nodding from our panelists, especially on that using data and attribution. Emma, Irvin, do you want to chime in on how you're tackling similar challenges?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, it's sorry, Emma, you want to go?
But you go first.
Thank you. So it completely feels like we're all facing a similar challenge, and it's very difficult sometimes to calculate ROI. And for us, it gets even more complex because we use a lot of television alongside digital, and TV obviously has not just a halo effect, but it sort of helps. It relies on good digital performance, but it also sort of feeds digital performance. And therefore, this the last click model obviously doesn't quite how do you say, rightly attribute all of the performance. And it's something we're working through, but it goes back to that fundamental change in the model, because the way we understand attribution, we understand data, and the ability to be able to actually look at a customer journey in its holistic nature is something that we haven't really had to do in the past. So therefore, the shift for me is not just, attribution is a very good example of where we get stuck when we're moving to a digital model, because actually we're using ideas that come from an analog space. We're trying to now replicate or lift and shift them into this space that doesn't quite match very well. And I'd love to learn from others as well, but it's something that we are really sort of investing in to be able to provide the right attribution so that we can see where the investments are going and the ROI that each of them is driving. But it's very much in the way that Sage was saying.
Yeah, I think just to sort of build on that as well, I think what's quite fascinating right now that we live in this time where we also see that if you think about the fund funnel, the donor journey funnel, where you take for awareness, consideration, per purchase, and so on, that we can see now in digital channels, everything has twisted around, and the way that you actually make your choice when you really choose to donate has also shifted. I mean, there's no perfect attribution model. It seems simply it's not, but at least if we get a few more steps closer to actually getting the whole journey, that's always good to see. So I think when it comes to digital, and this is why I really love digital fundraising in general, it's so fast moving, and everything you thought was like this is common knowledge, everything changes so fast as well. So I think it's really nice to hear from you, Sage, on how have you really been doing, working with this, and also how you guys been working with social listening as well. Because I also hear from many of our local offices that that's something that they want to start with. Some of them have, but not all of them. So I think it's a good shift for everyone to sort of move a little bit from the inside out perspective and start to listen more to the conversation that are already going on online.
Amazing. I'd love to turn to another aspect of how organizations have been evolving and adapting through the pandemic. Emma, if we can go to you, as a global head of digital fundraising, Plan have one of the more ambitious drive to become donor first, using data and personalization to help really future-proof your fundraising. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, let's say we're still in the middle of this, as you know, but I think it's been very exciting so far. And I would say, as I just mentioned, the main focus for us has really been to shift from the inside out perspective to the outside in, and really look to become more donor focused, and really look through the general donor experience to be able to increase conversions. This is definitely done on local levels as well, but we also see that we need to support that on a global level to be able to grow in digital channels. And I would say that one of our learnings so far is that there are many tools that can really support this process. Arvind, you mentioned marketing automation, for instance. We have all these really good, tools for websites and so on. And there are other, sectors that are advancing this a lot, especially within e-commerce. But I think one thing that we found the most important is to actually work in insights driven, and to really sort of build that into the daily work that we do, both on local and on global level. So when it comes to innovation, we are now in the process of developing new digital first products, where we're also working together with you at Blue State. And these are really to complement our current product offers that we have today, because we also would like to reach out to new donor segments that we don't usually actually communicate that with. And we also are really, more specifically, we're really looking into personalizing the donor experience within the product offer as well. So, and part of this journey for us has also been to develop a global digital fundraising dashboard with all our local markets to be able to follow up on digital fundraising performance for the whole organization as well.
Great, and we definitely see the use of dashboards and democratization of data and information really crucial to this journey. So because the information is so available, actually there's almost too much data, and how you present it, how people use it, and making sure people do use it becomes a much bigger priority. I'd love to also dig into some of the the focus on diversifying not just the products but also audiences. I've also mentioned this. You also been trying to attract a younger donor audience. We've just published a report. We're going to drop that into the chat, really looking at trends in giving in the UK. We're seeing that not unexpectedly, giving in the UK has gone up generally. So per person, people are giving more. But when they are starting to give or increase their giving, it's disproportionate to local organizations, then it's national, then it's international development. And so that kind of what we call the charity begins at home effect definitely does seem to be coming to light in the pandemic, which makes sense. We can see how our communities have been affected by COVID and by the struggles. That makes sense. But still, a lot of people have started and increased their donations to international development organizations. And surprisingly, less surprising for us, but more surprising for the sector probably, the younger audiences are the ones that have most increased their donation and most started giving to international causes. Would love to get a bit of your view of dealing with younger donors and a completely different set of propositions and needs. How have you found that?
I think what you just said really resonates with what we see as well as a global organization, even though you focus more on the UK market. But in general, we're really facing a time with decrease in trust and an increased need for transparency. And I think that's something that we as as peers need to address. And we can definitely see the shift and trend into the younger target audiences as well. They're not necessarily loyal to a specific brand. If we go back and think about our sort of current donor bases that have been with us for maybe 15 or 20 years, they really are loyal to our brand. But the younger target audiences are definitely more cost driven, and they have a tendency to actually donate because you actually communicated at the right time at the right channel. And we can also see that these people, as they are cost driven, also makes there's a window of opportunity to work with them in a different way. We see that sporadic giving is something on the rise within this group. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it fits into the usually donor programs that many organizations do have, especially when it comes to monthly giving. So I think for our sector, we need to think outside the box a little bit and see in what ways we can work with these younger target audiences and make sure that they convert in a way that really fits them. And also make sure that they come back, even though they might not want to become a monthly donor. So I would say that these are some of the things that we see. And also, we also see a great need for a really smooth and seamless donor journey. I think we also need to be quite humble as within our sector. We need to be humble by the fact that these people are they go into Amazon, they go to Facebook, so different social media apps, and that really creates their understanding of how you actually online behavior. So if they go into a site for a plan or somebody else, we usually don't have the same budget as Amazon. I can tell you for sure. but the need for a seamless donor journey, it's in the same level. So I think that is something that we need to think about as well. And we also seen that shift in a bigger interest in domestic causes as well. And for our organization, for instance, for Plan in International, that's something that we need to address as well. But I would say that it's never too soon to actually start think about the next generation of donors and start to engage them. I think you're on mute.
Alan, I can see you've got your microphone unmuted. Would you like to chime in here?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to what Emma was saying on age, and I think we're seeing a definite trend where you're getting a lot more younger donors coming in. But I also would say that we've been also seeing, for example, we use a lot of more digital advertising now to target older donors for legacy. So the big shift actually that I would say is that we're able to find donors who have a higher propensity to give, because if we actually look at data more closely, we probably get away from the averages of younger and older donors and find within those segments donors who are more likely to give. But just even in terms of products, and if I go back to the question on younger donors, I think it's quite interesting, because the kind of, I would say, innovation or the thinking that's going on across UNICEF. So for example, using influencers from local markets, even using, obviously K-pop and BTS in the East Asia, Southeast Asian region to reach out to younger audiences. All of that matters. Using, e-wallets and using fintech is about opening up the opportunity for younger donors to come in. And it's a combination of I would say data, technology, fintech that is making it easier. But more importantly, the fact that you can, create these journeys, even with younger donors that are specialized. I think one of the limitations earlier was even the sort of storytelling that was happening through offline channels. I don't think that we were as savvy in terms of storytelling to keep younger donors hooked. I don't think it's the same set of loyalty that you will get, but you do get a number of repeated donations that actually will translate into something more cost effective. But all said and done, I think we still would think that older donors would be the ones that give us more money over a longer term, and that tends to be the preferred sort of group of people that we want to talk to. It doesn't change the fact that digital now makes it easier for us to bring in younger donors, and a lot of us would be aspiring to actually bring those donors into the mix as well.
Great. And yeah, definitely that old myth of only younger people are online wasn't true before, definitely isn't true now, when everybody's relatives are on FaceTime and Skype and everything, and Zoom and everything else to really connect with family members. That's really blown that myth out the water, that digital fundraising is only for young audiences. But certainly that question on changing the audience mix and the needs of different audiences. Some audiences like giving monthly, some audiences like giving one-off gifts, and their behaviors are just different, and we've got to respond to that. Sage, I'm gonna throw it to you to see if you've got any thoughts on this. I know we've also gone through some of this journey.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think for us, sometimes we get a bit bogged down with innovation, of thinking that it has to be, reinventing the wheel, or that, we do have to target younger audiences specifically, or also kind of, I don't know, talk about NFTs, which I don't understand still. So I think it's kind of like looking, what we've done that's the most innovative recently, though, has also been looking at our own audiences, and then kind of looking at our new and existing audiences and seeing what we can do to retain them. So I guess kind of following 2020 and 6 consecutive emergencies, we really realized that we did need to focus on donor retention and really focus on that donor development. So kind of with Blue State, we developed a pilot and to run in December, and running a series of tests to actually look at different engagement models, and then look at different mechanisms, and then kind of just test creative, and then test different journeys. I love email, so I was a bit stubborn, and I think that Hannah was incredibly patient, so thank you, Hannah. But the test was just such a success, and I think it really did challenge a lot of our pre-existing, myself included, pre-existing expectations of how people respond to email and what works best. And I think kind of just with this pilot, it was 6 weeks, we sent probably like 90 emails, and to different segments, but sent a lot of emails out and really just tested everything. And I think it really did support kind of what we can take into 2021 in the future of how we actually engage and how we develop those journeys. And then I think kind of even the failures have really been eye-opening, and you can kind of see how you can test that and take those further and expand on them. So yeah, I definitely think with the different journeys and seeing how you can kind of improve that and kind of flex that constantly.
Great, yeah. And the thing that that pilot was incredibly important, because most organizations spend a lot more on acquisition than they do on retention and development. We all talk about retention, but in practice, acquisition is where the bigger budgets go. But it really showed the organization, and almost every client that we do this with actually shows focus more on retention, not more, but more than you are now, really can be hugely beneficial. And also, you spend all this money on acquiring all these donors, keep them, engage them, build that relationship, and make that a one-off, the fact that they've given through an emergency. Interestingly, through a lot of our other clients, we're doing a lot of different analyses at the moment, because a lot of organizations have had a bumper year of emergency donors, and we want to make sure that they stay. The behaviors of 2020 emergency donors are starting to shift, really. So historically, emergency donors may not give as much or may not give as often or again after that initial emergency. Actually, 2020 emergency donors seem to bust that myth a little bit. So we're seeing similar across different clients, similar behavior in terms of, yes, they are willing to give again. They'll give again more often if you ask them to continue giving to the same emergency that they really cared about the first time, but they are also willing to give monthly. They're also willing to do other things with the organization. So really shifting those myths, and just COVID has really changed how we have to be testing, we have to be analyzing that data. Otherwise, we're just making assumptions that the world still runs on the same assumptions that we had before COVID. I'd love to throw to the Q&A now. And so if anybody hasn't clicked on the link in the chat still, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go to a few of the questions that people have been submitting and voting here. We see a lot of questions, clearly a lot of attendees for the webinar from small organizations really wanting to figure out, if they don't have big teams, if they don't have big budgets, where do they start? How do they make things work if they don't have a lot of money to invest in digital, or if they don't really have a digital program at all at the moment? Where should they start? If anybody, we have some thoughts. We help with organizations starting, but if anybody has any thoughts, I'd love to hear from you first.
Maybe I can start on that one.
Yeah.
Or if anybody else would like to go. Okay. So I think if you are at the beginning of your journey, I think it's very important to sort of start small and be able to scale it. I would say that maybe the most important piece here is to actually work data driven, to be able to track what you are doing. So it's not necessarily that you need to work across a huge amount of different channels. You can start with one channel and do that quite well. But I think what I would sort of like to sort of highlight is the ability to be able to work agile with this learning cycle, where you actually test something, you evaluate, and then you improve. If you can incorporate that basic cycle into your daily work, you will make sure that you do the best with the budget that you have, and also time and efforts that you put into your digital channels. So with that said, I think to start with, and this is easy to not do, because if you're really in the beginning of your journey, but I would say that to be able to track and measure what's going on your site, what's going on with your traffic, I think that's actually golden worth. So if you can start doing that, then you will be able, and also to work, data driven and work with testing and so on. I don't think that's something you should do on top of things. It should really be part of your daily work, what's going on in your team, something that you bring into your weekly meetings, something that you post to your whole organization as well, to sort of build on that curiosity and share learning.
Great. Calvin?
That would be very much my starting point as well. I think the whole, sort of building of some kind of a data sort of driven approach, Google Analytics, the tools are pretty, pretty impressive and they're free in that sense. But using effective tools like that, using Google Trends, I think those would be good starting points for a small organization. I would also look at the internal culture and try and understand whether you're making investments, but you're making investments in is it because you're making investments in other places and not making them in digital? And is there a case to be made for digital? Is that the choice, or you just don't have overall enough money in fundraising? Because fundraising does require some degree of investment in some way, whether it's digital or it's non-digital. The other thing I would certainly look at is saying the sort of the collaboration between fundraisers and communications teams, because I think there's a lot of power there that can be unlocked using storytelling, using content, using video more effectively. One of the big things we saw last year was in the role of influencers in terms of really cascading and telling stories. The single biggest piece of not paid but organic social came through something called a card, CARRD, on Yemen, where a number of organizations, this was a completely, it wasn't started by one organization, it was by somebody out there who created this and put it out there, and it drove humongous amounts of traffic to organizations like UNICEF, and I know other sort of peer organizations as well, got leads from there. But how can you cultivate local influencers who can do that for you, who are really sort of good spokespersons for you without necessarily being a formal spokesperson? The digital space does have a lot of that potential, which if you don't have big budgets to invest, then you'll have to find alternative sources like influencers to be able to really drive new traffic. But at the heart of it, a good starting point would be to focus on good analytics. And there's always strong retention that goes alongside that to be able to drive a strong program on digital.
Yeah, I like to quickly jump in. I think completely echoing both of you that Google Analytics, I don't think I properly really discovered how good it is until my current role. I think don't be fundraising blind. Like, you do need to have that data and to be able to actually go back. I think also a big one in smaller organizations, from my own experience, is using the right measurements. I think really look at the ROI, don't look at vanity. I think kind of with digital, sometimes you can be really drawn into being like, oh, how many people are visiting my website, instead of actually looking at why they're visiting your website or how you're driving them there. And then another thing is just testing. What we still use is Google Optimize, which is the free service, and you can test 5 pages for free. So you don't have to download Hotjar, you don't have to necessarily go to Optimizely and go through the really expensive software. So kind of look at what is out there, kind of at your disposal.
Fantastic. And just to chime in some of the other things that we've seen working with other clients, hopefully most people have sort of the Google Grants, which gives you some free allocation of paid search. Paid search can work well. It's quite tricky for some keywords that are very competitive, but it can build traffic to your site if your site can be good. And you can also kind of bring people back to the site. That's a very good place to start. Sage mentioned email. Email is not free, but virtually free, and can be very, very affordable. Great way to get people closest to the brand. So if you don't have huge budget, you're not a huge organization, in a way you have almost an advantage versus the old model. So in the old models, you would have had to have a huge budget to do TV or to do face-to-face. And these kinds of things required a very large investment of capital to begin with. Now, if you're a small organization that has fantastic stories, like Erwin said, you can do social media for free or virtually free. You can do email, you can have great content on your site, use the grants, use paid search, use influencers, really start small, see what works, promote from there. But also work with your funders. So some funders, statutory funders, foundations, may be willing to give you grants to start a fundraising program, or to start a major giving or a mid-value program, and that can be a higher return than very large scale, lower value. So it's just some of the options and some of the opportunities in that space. I'd love to go to another question here. So a question about how to get senior leaders bought into investing in digital. What do we think? There's 3 organizations where senior leadership seems more convinced than ever before, but what about if they're not yet? How would you go about that?
I can try and have a go at it. I mean, we've been really very fortunate. So in fact, for the very first time, UNICEF has in its global sort of strategy for 22 to 25, they've included digital transformation up there in the strategy, which is really half the job done, because then the rest of the organization clearly comes around to that. But if you don't, I would say that this is probably the best moment that you can get in terms of how to convince senior leadership or anyone about digital. I'll go back to saying what I was saying at the start is there is a host of data information available there about what's going on, where are audiences, where are donations coming in from, the report that Blue State is putting out there. I would use some of that to be able to make a case for for digital. There's also a case to be made for saying, depending on how large it is. I think Lizzie and other colleagues on this call were talking about, if you're going to start small, then what's the plan and how do you really grow? But if you're a large organization, I'm assuming that you already have some success. I would certainly start by looking at saying your own, sort of Google Analytics, whether you're fundraising or not, you have some of that available. You can see where the audiences are. You can see the numbers spiking up for your audience, for your organization already in 2020. I mean, very clearly, if you can make a case for saying this is where your audiences are, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be, sort of fundraising there. I mean, that would be the most obvious place to start making the arguments for investments. And if you have a culture of testing and you're able to actually run small tests, that obviously is again proof of, that you can get a positive ROI. If it's, I would say that if there's one, the next 3 to 6 months, you're going to see really strong results coming in from digital, probably later as well, but we haven't had this kind of organic traffic coming into websites. So if you want to make a case, I would say jump at it now, get a business case, go out to your leadership. This is really the moment when you can get much better ROI than probably what will happen 6 to 12 months later.
Great.
Yeah.
And a couple of questions on the theme of, maybe it's similar, the theme of innovation and kind of getting funding for innovation and new products audiences. Sage and Emma, do you want to chime in as well?
Sorry, could you come again, please? Because I couldn't hear you.
Excuse me, I was muted. There are a couple of questions around how to best leverage innovation, how to kind of embed and foster innovation in the current climate, both for audiences and for products, channels.
Well, I can share a little bit more about what we have done in Plan International. First of all, we really believe that anybody can innovate, any of our staff, and to be able to show our staff that we really mean business, that we want to advance in innovation as well. We also created what we call a global innovation fund, which anybody across the global organization can apply to. And this fund is focused both on fundraising, but also programs and in impact. This is a fund that we had for the last 4 or 5 years, and it doesn't necessarily have the same pressure on our ROI as you might see if you just do an ordinary business case. This is a way for us to really, try and test new ground and be able to sort of future-proof our organization. We also have something called an investment fund, but that's very, very much linked to our ROI. So just to share a bit from us.
Yeah, so at UKP UNHCR, a lot of our investment is still very much tied to ROI. And so it's kind of still figuring out how we can actually move away from that and have more room for innovation that isn't necessarily tied to ROI. But I think kind of going back to the social listening, I think Hester had a question about that as well. And then also kind of different appeals. I think really being able to kind of listen to the conversations and then really kind of innovate around the specific appeal themes that you're talking about. I think kind of for winter, we've always kind of done the same theme. We've done kind of cold and winter and, you know, protection, but really kind of talking to donors and seeing kind of what they're interested in. We were able to kind of completely recreate and reimagine what winter appeal means. And then that was still kind of tied to, you know, our ROI. It's still, we had our winter appeal, but we were able to shift that and then kind of reimagine that appeal. And then that was a way that we were able to kind of innovate, try something new, and then really have a much more successful appeal in the end.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's a great, there's a few questions around content and how do we differentiate, how do we keep momentum as well. That's that winter campaign, and both winter campaigns actually for Unity over the last couple of years, really testament to how you can differentiate while still leaning into what an audience cares about, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and really still raise those donations. We don't have any more time. We have many more questions than we have have time for, which is apologies. Such is life. There's so much interest in this. I just want to make a note of that. There's some questions around ethics of using imagery, and we're actually producing some guidance on that. A lot of our clients are asking similar questions now, and so watch this space from Blue State in the next few weeks. To if you're interested in that particular topics, we're also really interested in how organizations really shift and really represent communities we work with more respectfully, but while still maintaining those results. We'll be kind of publishing more on that soon. I'd love to give everyone a bit of an opportunity. Any last comments before Zoe wraps us up?
Just want to say good luck. Start small, test, and learn. And as you go along, everything will become more and more efficient. So it's just to start somewhere. I think that's the best point. Just to start somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, and I would say that this is probably the best moment to start. It will get harder from here. This is the time when donors are really generous. This is the time when lots of people are spending far more time online than you've probably seen in the past. If you've got to start now and you know, make the best of it, because this is probably the time when there's a lot more solidarity and a lot more support out there for organizations and the work you're doing. So I think it's a good time to go.
And also the amazing part of digital fundraising is that you can really measure most everything. You can really do that. So you have black on white, what works not. So you really can learn. So learn from that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess be prepared to be proven wrong, and this
be humble.
This is unprecedented times. So yeah, really exciting time to do digital.
Okay then, so it sounds like really pertinent time for kind of organizations to invest in people and time, and it really sounds like there's this test and learn, so you have to be prepared to get it wrong. So some of those questions that people were saying, Lizzie, one of the questions that you asked about kind of how do you get your senior leadership on board for it, it sounds like you really need them bought in if you're going to invest in something digital. I think by the number of questions that we had through, I can tell that everybody was really engaged. So I just want to thank Lizzie and Blue State for all their work, and that Lizzie shared a report earlier, so please do check it out. Lena's also just shared a feedback form in the chat box, so also please do fill that out, because it helps us learn what works and what doesn't work as well for webinars like this. And also someone asked a question, we are recording this, so it will be posted later through our website, and you'll find out when that happens. So all it takes for me to say thank you for everyone, and that's it. Thanks, bye.
Thank you so very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.